Welcome to this episode of Jeff's Journey, which is number 85, which is 10 months since I did the last one. Kind of an insane time frame. I have a list of some stuff to go over. I've just been writing down over the last week or so, and I mean 10 months, not going to be able to cover much in detail, so we'll go over big swaths of stuff. But it's an interesting question of why I haven't done one in 10 months, and I don't have a super great answer. There's interesting research and theory on how people perceive time, especially from the continental psychologists over in Europe a couple of decades ago now, from the existentialist movement, and my perception of time does seem to be a bit off. But also, there potentially, I think, is the idea of mortality salience. So it's how aware you are of that you're going to die changes your behavior to some extent. And relatively recently, I've been noticing more issues with my lungs and weakness in my lungs. Right? I have issues with my heart still, and we'll get into some more stuff about that from the issues in my brainstem. But I think that kind of triggered it, and I was feeling pretty confident about longer health for quite a while, and maybe that's part of why I haven't made these videos. I've done a lot of other stuff, so I'm going to be checking off stuff on the list, all right? And this is not going to be in a reasonable order because I am not going to be able to organize it in a reasonable order. So let's start out with health stuff fairly recently. I got my heart rate down, all right, through the chiropractic stuff and different experiments I've been doing, which I do neck bridges now. I implemented that a number of months ago now, maybe 6 months ago, which is also called a wrestler's bridge, where you lean back and put your forehead on the floor when you're on your back and arch your back up. And that has helped my adjustments quite a bit and helped stabilize my spine so I can do more stuff without throwing off my spine. And I've done many experiments. Most of them do not work out very well, but some of them do, and I keep kind of making progress for the most part. We're in a series of experiments now as well. Almost always we're in a series of experiments with my health. But my heart rate stayed above 100 even when I was sleeping for about 2 years after I got sick in 2015 in Africa. And I mean, that's rough, right? It like burned out all my hormones. At one point, I just blew up like a balloon, gained tons of weight. I gained like 10 pounds in 1 week without even changing my eating patterns or anything. It was just everything was just fried, and it's exhausting, right? It's like you're running all the time. You feel like you just need to sleep all the time, and your sleep is not good because your heart's just cranking while you're sleeping. Everything's just firing overtime, and I burn through iodine like crazy, so I have to take iodine. It's the only supplement I actually take now because I did a bunch of experiments with those, a lot of diet experiments over the last couple of years and stuff like that. But I got it down somewhat, right? So my heart rate is normally in the 80s, maybe 90s, so it's a little better side of 100, but still bad. Before I got sick in Africa, my resting heart rate was in the 60s, right? Like mid 60s, which isn't bad. It's not great, like really top level athletes a lot of times get down to the 50s, and I was just hearing that Jimmy Johnson, the NASCAR driver, is in super good shape. His resting heart rate is in the 40s, which is insane. So just the 60s would be super good, just like a normal one. And I mean, geez, my mom, we check heart rates every now and then. I've got this little pulse ox, which also checks heart rate and checks the amount of oxygen in the blood. And I'll check it every now and then. Mom will check hers, and it's often that mine's like 96 and hers like 65, right? Mine's like over 30 points higher, which is just ridiculous. So mine's, not bad for me right now. It's 93, the bottom one. 98 is the amount of oxygen in my blood, which is good. That's supposed to be high. Sometimes my oxygen drops into the low 90s too, which is really weird. And I wonder if that does indicate some sort of weakness in the lungs or what. But we stopped adjusting my thoracic spine and my lumbar spine, so like the whole middle of my spine. And we just adjust the cervical spine and then the sacral part right at the bottom in your hips. And that is supposed to activate more of the parasympathetic nervous system and less of the sympathetic nervous system. And that might be doing something. We've been experimenting with that just for the last couple of weeks. And we had this last Wednesday and Thursday had a huge heart rate anomaly, the biggest one since late 2015, in that mine was really low. In the morning, at one point, it stayed in the high 50s for a few minutes while I was checking it, and then it fluctuated that day mostly in the 60s through 80s, but it stayed weirdly low. And sometimes stuff will change when I'm sleeping, right? It's like roll over in your sleep, you're not even aware of stuff, and neck changes, and then boom, my health will be way worse the next day. Every now and then it'll be better, usually worse. And then the next day, so I figured after I sleep, like, I got an adjustment on Monday and then Thursday. Those are my normal adjustment days. So, the fact that my heart rate was better Wednesday morning for some reason, I couldn't relate it to a proximal cause, right? Like, it wasn't obvious that I did this thing, then this got better. So very confusing, and I figured it would go away after one night of sleeping. And it did not. It wasn't as low as the day before, but it was still pretty darn low. And then Thursday I got an adjustment. I kind of went back to my normal, the 80s, 90s, sometimes the 70s. And it's really odd. But over the last couple of weeks, it seems to have dropped down a little bit. Now, not too long ago, maybe a month ago now, I was shoveling really heavy snow. I got my max heart rate. I was going at it pretty hard, basically as hard as I could. My max heart rate got up to 172. And that, if you do like the time things and what your max heart rate is supposed to be versus your age, that puts me about as being a 48-year-old, right? I'm a 31-year-old. I just had my birthday a couple of weeks ago, February 1st, which was a lot of fun. We had some family and whatnot, and got together, ate some steaks, went to this one steak place, Hank's Tavern, where they give you a super hot rock, like a 600-degree rock with pieces of steak, and then you cook it up yourself, and that was really good. And so my heart rate got up to 172, which it should be able to get higher, but I couldn't. And then it took like 2 days to get below 100 again. So super bad recovery time, which is the idea of a stress test, right? You get your heart rate way up, and then you see how fast it recovers. Mine was really bad. But not too long ago, maybe like a week ago, I shoveled, and it was a lot lighter snow. It was easier snow, but still, my heart rate got up there a ways. And I got done shoveling, and I should have written down these specific numbers. I talked about them with like my chiropractor and my mother and stuff at the time, or whoever was around. But it's a couple of friends, but I didn't specifically write them down. And so my heart rate got up to whatever, near its max. It got up to probably 170, right in there. And then after I came inside and I took a shower, afterwards it was down to 100. So fairly good recovery in a short period of time for me, right? So things are different with me, obviously. And then I was going to the chiropractor. I was shoveling to go to the chiropractor. And by the time I got to the chiropractor, my heart rate was down to like 90. And then I believe after the chiropractor, it got down to like 70, something like that, and into the 70s. And so it was a much better recovery, very good recovery, and that is good. That is extremely good. So the higher heart rate means all my stuff is just cranking all the time, right? And that's because I got these deformities in the brainstem and issues there, and that controls your heart rate, breathing, organ function for the most part. And that's both what wears me out in the day and kind of makes me less, going out and doing crazy adventures and stuff like that. Plus, there's some other things with that. But it's also the thing that's going to limit my life span, is my organs not functioning as well. And, the heart burning out, or the lungs not being able to breathe enough to survive, something like that. And interesting note here, I think I have this written down to talk about, is that Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island and Jekyll and Hyde, one of the greatest writers of all time. Although his reputation fluctuates throughout the years, but still one of the greatest writers of all time. He had trouble with his lungs his entire life, and he traveled all over the world looking for better air, essentially, to breathe, which is a very interesting reason to be an adventurer. And he was one of the greatest writers of all time, and he died when he was 46. Published his first book, Treasure Island, his first fictional book, when he was 31, and died when he was 46, and had a tremendous career, which is very interesting. George Orwell wrote 1984, An Animal Farm, right? Another one of the greatest writers in the English language. He struggled with his lungs his entire life. They wouldn't let him enroll in the military, the British military, in World War II, and then he ended up kind of getting in like a weird way, like a weird like militia thing, to get involved and do some service in there. And he had a tremendous career in writing. Started as a very young kid. I think he said when he was like 6, he decided that he wanted to be a writer as a career. He died when he was 46, and so very just kind of interesting that some of the great writers in history have had weak lungs and breathing problems. I had some goals. So the Chiro experiments are ongoing, but it seemed like some of the stuff we're on right now might be making improvements. And then someone pointed out, a friend of mine, Holly, pointed out that in my videos from a long time ago, my videos from like 2018, I had this cough. And that's one of the things that I've been worried about recently over the last few months. I have this cough. I want to cough like this all the time. Just all the time. My lungs just feel kind of weak, right? Like they're working to work. They're working hard, and which is, it's weird and not a good sign. And she pointed out that a couple of years ago, I still had that similar cough, but I had other major issues, so I wasn't maybe noticing the lung issues and the cough as much. So maybe it's been a thing this whole time. And associated with Klippel-Feil syndrome is a tendency, I can't remember the technical medical word for this, a tendency to want to cough all the time. So that is someone associated with that. And organ deformities and organ failures and all sorts of stuff are associated with it. Also, chiropractor Nate, he was playing with my occipital lobes, right, at the base of my skull, which we've been messing with more. My C1 and my C2 haven't needed adjusting as much. I seem to have figured out how to stabilize them by adding in the lordotic curve and doing the neck bridge to stabilize stuff. So many experiments over a long period of time, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And stuff works at different times, because if you get a little bit healthier, then you can do a little bit more. But if you're less healthy and you try to do that same stuff, it hurts you. So very complex and confusing over time. But my occipital lobes seem to need it more. These plates at the base of your skull, essentially, right on the top of your spine. And as he was, they were pressed together. Ooh, they're very sore right now too. So in between, there were two pressed together, right? There were several other movements that they needed to make. But when he ran his finger down that, I felt a huge lump in like the base of my throat down here, which is interesting. So that might be associated in some way. So weak lungs, weird feeling in the throat, it might all be stemming from the brainstem. I think it is, probably. All right. Enough with that. I had several goals over 2019 that I wanted to accomplish just kind of adventure-wise, and I wanted to ride a motorcycle, ride a horse, and take a flight. I did not take a flight, mostly because I kind of ran out of time, logistics, and a lot of money. My teaching went down in China because of several reasons. China is restricting itself more, so it's sealing itself off. It's cutting off its internet. They elected the president for life, right? So they have a traditional dictator now. Again, Mr. Xi, whatever his name is, XI is how we anglicize it. And so China is sealing itself off because it's trying to consolidate power. Right now they have the whole Wuhan virus, which is, I still talk to kids several days a week. In China, it's much worse than what we realize in the United States, even though we think it's big and it's worse. A lot worse. No one goes outside. If you go outside, you get arrested. It's pretty bad. And I didn't end up taking a flight. But I did end up riding a motorcycle. My cousin, April, she lives right down the road. She has a little 250 Honda Rebel, tiny little thing. I didn't even know if that sucker would go on the highway. She'd never had it above 65. And I got it weighs above 65, which was a lot of fun. I put a bunch of miles on that this summer, more than she did, and it was fun. It was an interesting little ride, and the motorcycle riding went great. You know, there was a time when my spine was so unstable in my cervical spine that I really had trouble like walking because the impact was too much, or driving because the little bumps in the road were too much, and they would just throw my spine off, and then it was pretty messed up. I mean, at one time I would go to the chiropractor, and just that drive back and forth, it kind of messed me up. And then that's all the driving I did, or all the riding in the car I did. So that was, you know, huge improvements. I can take the bumpiness of a road pretty well now. I did notice that if I drive a car, because I'm like more alert, paying attention, it seems to stabilize my spine a little bit more. I do better than just riding as a passenger. If I just ride as a passenger, it seems like I relax too much, and then it will throw the bumps in the road will throw my spine off a little bit. You don't think about the bumps in the road when you're not having major issues. If you have to think about the bumps in the road, you're having some major issues. And then I did do the horse thing, so I volunteered at Chance Stables, and it was, I can't remember how I got associated with them. If I knew someone that went there, I just messaged him, or what exactly. You can just create your own opportunities fairly easily like that, so I might have just, I remember, they had a guy coming in, Phil Oakes, a horse trainer. And so it was a couple of day thing, and it was like one of my goals this year was to see if I could get back on a horse, because it seems ridiculous, right? Like if I can't take the bumpiness on the road, like could never get on a horse. But the bumpiness on the road, I seem to be managing. Did a motorcycle, seem to be riding the motorcycle okay. Like, all right, let's shoot for the horse. Let's get wild. And I went to this weekend seminar, Phil Oakes, with horse training stuff, just to observe. And, it was like $25 or something. Just to observe. It was a few $100s to join if you had a horse. And it was super interesting. Like, I learned a ton. I wrote an article on it, on some of the notes that I took, because I usually have like pen and paper around, and very interesting stuff. I learned a ton. And then that place seemed pretty cool. And they run some interesting things. They have like kids come out on certain days. They have some troubled kid programs come out, and then they have like you can kind of volunteer for use of a horse one day and stuff like this. So I started going out there on Sunday or Saturdays, and I probably went out there for like a month, something like that. Not super long, each Saturday, and I would help like weed whack and stuff like this, which kind of pushed what I could physically do as well. I was pretty impressed with what I was capable of doing physical work-wise. And, I just worked for a couple hours. It wasn't like I was working a manual labor 8-hour job. But it was pretty hard manual labor job for like 2 hours. And, I chopped down some small trees and whatnot. So I was kind of happy with that, actually, just by itself. And then I was able to get on a horse. I mostly walked around on a horse, and that seemed to be perfectly fine with my spine, especially because, like on a bigger horse, you really kind of stand up in the stirrups, and that extension of the legs and then having to stabilize my own spine really seems to work decently well. And then I even trotted on a horse. Not very much, maybe like 5 steps I trotted on a horse, and I was nervous about doing that, and the horse wasn't much of a go horse. They gave me a horse that I really didn't want to move. Everyone has trouble with getting this horse to move, so that was kind of annoying because I like to go. I like to move. I'd rather have a horse that prefers to just canter all the time and doesn't even want to walk, but nevertheless. So I did like a 5-step trot, and yeah, I don't think I got up to a canter. No, I did like a 5-step trot. Trot's pretty rough. And I was nervous about that. I got off and see how it went, and I was fine that day. I was fine the next day, so I was very surprised. I don't know if it would be a good idea to pursue more horseback riding, but that went well. So that was really cool. And then, just been busy, and I didn't end up going back there, but it was a very interesting experience to volunteer for a month helping out and stuff, and then get on a horse. So that was pretty cool. And then eventually I'm going to take a flight somewhere, a cheap flight, to just test out. I think that the pressurization might mess up because of the weird position of the bones in my neck, right? My odontoid especially is retroflexed and my brainstem is kinked around it, of how the cerebral spinal fluid is flowing in my skull. So it might be something like I develop too much, I get too much cerebral spinal fluid in my skull, and there's too much pressure because of the pressure in the cabin, and because the odontoid is too close to the brainstem, the cerebral spinal fluid can't flow out fast enough, and it causes some issues, something like that. I'm not sure. In 2018, when I went to Colorado to wrestle alligators, which, that just sounds insane to say, which it basically is. They had jars of fingers right in the office. It was a lot of fun. It was a blast. I worked up to a 9-footer. And the guy said like 85% of people quit before they get there or can't do it, and that was a blast. There's some videos of that. The best one is the 6-footer Cujo, who had bitten off people's fingers, but he was super feisty, and we got a good video of me pulling him out of the water. He had an infected leg. We ended up giving him a shot to treat it. Very whole interesting story to go with that, which I'll skip. But when I got to Colorado, I was already messed up. Like, I wasn't messed up from alligator wrestling. Like, the alligator wrestling probably messed me up, because when I got back, I had to do like 6 weeks of chiropractic adjustments to get back to kind of my normal. And so that whole trip messed me up for a month and a half afterwards. But I was already messed up when I got to Colorado. So it seems like just the flight messed me up, and I tried some unique neck braces. I bought and experimented with several neck braces for different stuff and whatnot, and so I'm not sure exactly what was the causative factor there, but I think it might have just been the pressure, so I kind of have to test that. I got a note here about the weak lungs, Robert Louis Stevenson, Orwell, 44, 46. The under-over on my life expectancy, and this is from kind of a sketchy paper, not very good research necessarily, is 40, right? So the normal life expectancy for a man is different with women, because they live like 5-10 years longer, something like that. If you have Klippel-Feil syndrome, issues with your brainstem that are also giving issues for your heart, which obviously I have, then my life expectancy would be between 35 and 45 for the most part. So the under-over is 40, and I just thought that was an interesting comparison, because Robert Louis Stevenson and George Orwell lived to 44 and 46 respectively. So the Russian students have been great, right? So because my business in China went down for teaching, I picked up Russian, and how that came about is Oleg, the guy that I wrote Horror Without Borders with, which I don't even know if I've ever mentioned that in a video before. So Horror Without Borders was, I met a guy in Russia online, in VK, which is like Russia's Facebook, in a writing group. He liked some of the stuff I was talking about, and he messaged me and asked me if I would edit some of a video he had transcribed, because Oleg knows like 8 languages. He teaches like 5, something like that. And so he does a bunch of translation stuff. He only does horror stuff, only scary stuff. But he had some friends that were shooting short movies. And the shorts he was making English subtitles for. And then he was like, hey man, like I have this little like 20-minute film, it's a horror story, and I wrote the subtitles for it. Would you like look it over to make sure it sounds good? And so I just edited a couple of these just for free, just because he asked me, because it's cool. And then he was like, I'm starting a publishing firm, Horoscope Press, and I'm publishing my own novels, and then I'm going to be doing other publishing projects, and one of those is Horror Without Borders. And we're going to get authors from all over the world to submit short horror stories to us, like 1,000 words, right in there. And these little micro pieces of fiction, we're going to put them all together, and it's going to represent the horror community all around the world. And Oleg, very good at organizing. He ended up arranging over 50 authors from over 20 countries, and it's a full-on book. I can't remember the word count. It's like 80,000 words or something, and I edited the whole thing, right? Because he had to work with some other translators, because we had a bunch of languages and stuff, but he got it all into English, and then I ended up editing the whole beast of a book, and it was cool. And I had a story in there, Matt's Eyes, which is a very scary zombie story. I believe my Aunt Karen, I told her not to read it, and then she did read it and ended up crying because of it when she was over one day on the couch, just a little bit, she just kind of teared up. But that's a sign of a good horror story, and horror is not usually my thing. And I found out, so editing sounded super cool, right? Like getting paid, not a huge amount of money, but a little bit of money for rating, changing, thinking about stories. I thought it was going to be cool. Like, over that project, I just liked editing less and less, and then, like, don't like it at all. That's editing is not my thing, not super fun. And I was doing line editing, right? There's 3 types of editing, like copy editing, where you're looking at spelling, punctuation; line editing, where you're making sure the words are communicating what the author's trying to say; and developmental editing, where you're helping, like, come up with a story, change characters, stuff like that. So I was mostly doing line editing, including copy editing, and then a tiny bit of developmental editing. But yeah, that was a good way to figure out that I don't like editing, and it came out good. The hardcover, the ebook, is published in English, and the hardcover and the physical copy and the ebook are published in Russian. And I had an interview in a major, I think the leading Russian horror magazine, and how the interview was extremely interesting. They sent me a series of questions, and then I answered the questions in writing and sent it back to them, because we're in different languages and stuff, and that's how they did an interview. So I have an interview published in a Russian horror fiction magazine, and I think it's called Darker magazine. So which is just kind of cool. The Russian student's been super interesting. So Oleg recommended, because I think I mentioned on Facebook and VK that my business has gone down, and he's like, hey man, why don't you check out this company I know, Stein, and they're big, they're a unicorn company right there, which means they reached $1 billion net worth before going public, and I believe someone else told me that, but that's what I heard. And so they're growing like crazy for teaching English in Eastern Europe and mostly Russia. And he's like, apply there. And I was like, all right. So I applied there, and I got accepted. And, mostly, I started out completely doing adults, which is very interesting, right? So I've taught, like, surgeons, and I've taught finance directors, and I've taught, like, rich people. I mean, one of my students started a barbershop for men in Russia, and he owns 10 locations around Moscow, and then he franchised it and owns 100 franchises throughout the rest of Eastern Europe, and he retired a number of years ago. He's just a rich guy. He goes wherever he wants, whenever he wants, buys whatever he wants, and he was a super interesting guy to talk to. He majored in, I don't have classes with him anymore, but super interesting guy to talk to. He majored in American history in university in Russia, specializing in the Spanish-American War, right, which is mostly in the United States a forgotten war, which is just super interesting. And then, all sorts of stuff. I could talk about students all day, but the students started getting younger, right? So now I have 2 girls that are both 11, which is pretty funny. I've got a few teenagers, and then I've got a number of adults too, and I even have 1 actress. Right? Like this summer, she's going to be in 2 movies and 1 major play in Moscow, all in Russia, and she's working on next summer trying to move to Hollywood. She's coming to Hollywood for a couple of weeks this year. But it's funny because I'm like an acting coach. We're role-playing casting calls, and we're like reading lines from dialogues, and we're working on monologues together. We're working on a monologue from Alice in Wonderland the other day, and then a dialogue from Twilight between Bella and Edward. And so, yeah, I'm like an acting coach now, which is just hilarious. And I've been doing a ton of writing coaching. And I have some students that just want to focus on writing, and that is a lot of fun, right? And that seems like it's editing, but it's not. I've written a number of articles on that. It's a lot more fun than editing, because you're working it out with the person at the time, like live, and you're making something, you're creating something. It's really cool. So that's a lot of fun. And I did a speaking class, public speaking class for homeschool kids in Whitehall. I'm going to do one this coming month in March at Norton Shores at the library. And that was very interesting. And I focused on impromptu speaking, so I taught them this very basic structure, which I've taught to several adults in Russia as well. There's a computer programmer that I've had as a student that he's working on going around to conferences, computer programming conferences and technology conferences, giving speeches, and we worked on some speaking stuff, and several other adult people too in Russia that wanted some training in public speaking. But I taught this very basic structure of how to stall, right? If you're just asked a question, you're at a conference, you're in front of people, whatever it might be, you're in front of a small group at a business meeting, how to say thank you in a slow and reasonable way. It sounds very good, right? Just thank you for having me here. I've really liked the conference so far, yada, yada, yada. You can just come up with like a few seconds to delay it. That sounds very reasonable, so you can come up with an idea. And then how to open with a strong question or a thesis at the beginning. Like dragons are the greatest fairy tale magical creatures ever created, right? You just lay down a thing or you ask a question. Have you ever wondered where the idea for a dragon came from? Something like that, right? Get a nice little pause in there, and then you just dive right into a story, and it can be a story from your life, it can be someone else's story, it can be a fictional story, whatever it is. And then at the end, you make your point of whatever you're making, like the moral of the story, right? You make your point based off of the story, answering your question or coming back around to your thesis statement, something like that. And it was a lot of fun to watch the kids play with that. Teaching kids public speaking is a lot different than teaching adults public speaking. I've worked with a lot of adults on public speaking through Toastmasters, and kids are a bit different, a bit harder to focus, all that antsy energy and whatnot, and they don't have any experience of professional speeches, right? They haven't even really seen any. They don't know what it's like to go to a business meeting. They don't know what politics is, basically. They don't pay attention if they go to church to who's speaking. They just have no connection with speaking for the most part, and most of them can't do it at all, which is very interesting, but they can learn. It's very important. I say, and I wrote an article on this, that really the three most important things are for teaching, for learning, reading, writing, well, I was just going to do my language thing, reading, writing, listening, and speaking are the 4 parts of language. So I ask students which thing they want to work on, but that's not what I intend to say. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and rhetoric. Right? I call them the 4 R's. 3 hours is kind of the classic American thing of reading, writing, arithmetic, but reading, writing, arithmetic, and rhetoric. And in ancient Greece, ancient Rome, rhetoric, right, speaking, this ability to have eloquence in front of a crowd was the most important one that you were working towards, and everything else just developed that. And obviously science is super important, but I think even more important than that is history and stories, learning morality and behavioral patterns and the emergent properties of society and how that all works. And a lot of those things are the things that are not emphasized, which is really weird because those are the things that should be emphasized. And so I have a different concept of education, more of a classical education of the human being about the human rather than just technology, although technology is super important, but you need a more fundamental, stronger base, right? You can develop crazy technology that can make things better or worse, and whether it makes things better or worse will depend on your study of narratives and history and morality, these other things. Whether you can convince people to do good or bad things will depend on whether you can argue your side, which depends on your ability to have rhetoric, this type of thing. Anyways, I took one student, so Bella, she's a daughter, the 8-year-old daughter of my friend Holly. We did some writing classes. I was doing writing classes for some homeschool kids too, which is very cool, creative writing groups. And I go to one creative writing group just for adults at the library, which is a lot of fun. But I was, segues in, and I was doing open mic nights for a little while too, going around and reading some of my poetry, that type of stuff, and that was a lot of fun. Sunday nights, once a month, there's a bar that has it down in Muskegon Heights, and what's that bar called? I can't remember offhand. But that was a lot of fun, and learned a lot there, right? They were more into this spoken poetry. It's poetry that's meant to be spoken and performed, this performative poetry rather than just purely read, which I've read a lot of poetry, and I think about, when I write poetry, I think about other people reading it. I don't think about other people listening to it or watching it, which has changed my concept and idea of poetry and how to do that a little bit, which I'm going to be writing a poem soon, and it's going to be a dark and scary poem for Oleg, because he's putting together another book, which I'm not editing. He really wanted me to edit, but I'm not going to edit it, but I'm going to write a poem for it, and I want it to both read very well, but I want it to be able to be performed really well too, so I've been thinking about that, which is really interesting. And I gave a number of speeches on grief and meaning of life, right? Like, they had some cool titles like Alligator Wrestling and the Meaning of Life, I think, and I have some of those on my YouTube, they're kind of cool. And I also gave 4 speeches at Harry Potter Festival, Potter in the Park in Sparta this summer, which was a blast. I gave a speech on gnomes, I gave a speech on the many uses of the rubber duck, I gave a speech on dragons, and I gave a speech on muggle dueling, where someone else helped me, Laura, and I borrowed from a guy in Muskegon who runs like live fantasy role-playing stuff, and then he has a gaming store, Griffin's Rest. I borrowed some equipment from him, some swords, and I got some fake guns. I had a woman that was loaning me real dueling pistols, like real old-school muzzle-loading dueling pistols that she has in her family as an heirloom, and it was awesome, but we couldn't get approval from the police, and I didn't want to bring real guns to the thing, so I just got some fake toy guns. But it was, with the orange tip. But it was a blast doing the whole thing. I brought some rubber ducks that I threw out into the crowd, and that was a lot of fun. There's some videos of those. There's a video of the people fighting over one of the rubber ducks, like tug of war in the crowd. That whole festival was a blast, but it was exhausting because I gave 4 speeches, and the one was early, I think at 8 a.m., and the last one was 6 p.m. It was something like that. It was a long day. And I performed a number of weddings. I've performed a total of 4 weddings now. One was translated for Julita and William into Spanish by Julita's aunt or cousin, and that was awesome. That's my first. I've given hundreds of speeches, mostly small, and a lot of them just Toastmasters groups, but still a lot of speaking experience. And that's the first time I've ever had one translated, and it was very interesting because you stop at certain points, and we rehearsed it and went over it. It was great. And then I did one for Joel and Kelly, and that was my first really religious one, which we completely customized. I went in and we had several meetings where we went over specifically what they wanted, their favorite books in the Bible, and then the favorite stories in the Bible, and then I adapted those and put those into the wedding ceremony, which is awesome. And I want to write articles on both those weddings, but I haven't yet. All right, come back around to the open mic thing. So Bella, we were writing some stuff. I can't remember the exact circumstances around this. We were writing some stuff, and it was kind of cool. And then I was saying how some of the stuff I had been writing, like poetry and stuff, I'm going to go to an open mic tonight, right, at the library, and read some of my stuff. And she's like, I want to go. I'm like, yeah, as long as your parents say it's okay, sure. I'll take it. She's well behaved, it's not like I would take all 8-year-olds to an open mic, lose a kid or something. But she's well behaved, so I was comfortable with that, and we get along really well, we're friends. And so she decided to come. And but there was this gap. There's an hour, 2-hour delay or something. And I was like, hey, I'm just going to go stop by Barnes & Noble, look through some of the books, something like that. And so while we were just hanging out a little bit before this, it was like, do you want to do one? I asked her if she wanted to read a poem at the open mic night. I was like, it'll be fine. It'll be all adults. You'll be the only kid, but they won't mind, right? It'll be really cool for everyone. So she was like, yeah. And at Barnes & Noble, then we went and we just looked through the poetry section, and we're working on what she could read, and then working on how she would feel comfortable kind of presenting and reading in front of people. And we picked out a couple of poems from Maya Angelou and practiced them, and she'll write them at the thing, and it was great. People loved it. I think I'm pretty sure there's video of that too. So that was really cool, and that was just a fun experience. Also, let's see. Oh, at the very beginning, I mentioned how I haven't had videos in a while, and I talked about mortality salience as a possibility, something like that. I also have a low conscientiousness score, right? One of the big 5 personality factors. I'm in the 0th percentile compared to other people, so that's probably part of it as well. I took a trip to the Grand Traverse Commons, which was an insane asylum in Traverse City, which is very unique history, pretty awesome. I wrote a poem on it for Oleg, and I think it might have gone into a magazine in Russia, the poem I wrote on the Grand Traverse Commons, and about ghosts being in the tunnels and this type of stuff. So which is pretty cool, pretty interesting. And I went up there with my mother, my aunt, my uncle. That was just a blast. We got to walk through the tunnels and everything, and they had a unique concept of putting people on like a farm and helping them, getting them working, getting them fresh air, and trying to really rejuvenate them. And then it really went downhill, and they came up with the concept of like antipsychotic drugs and just drugged everyone out, and it really went bad. And then the government also didn't like them producing so much food on the farm with cheap/free labor, so they ended up implementing the fact that they needed to do wages, which means they bankrupted the whole thing, and then they had to release all the crazy people on the street. Just horrible government interference there. Yeah. And let's see, well, I guess I think someone might be knocking, but it shouldn't be for me. What day is it? It's Tuesday morning? Nah, can't be for me. So several other things. I am now involved in politics, which is kind of insane, right? I you know, the local government corruption in Dalton Township affected me and came to my notice when they attacked the farm, right? They sued the farm. They organized with the neighbor to sue the farm on the same day and informed the farm just the morning of that they were suing them, which is a violation of the Constitution because of due process, in my opinion, but no one's even pursued that. And I just thought it was ridiculous, so I started writing some articles on it. Now it's grown so much, and technically I've released 15 articles just on this case, and I filed a police report on the supervisor and the board for violating the Michigan Open Meetings Act, which I had evidence for, and they completely ignored. And the police actually tried to intimidate me into not filing the report, and then the prosecutor wouldn't follow it up. And then I filed 2 recalls on the supervisor, one for violating the Open Meetings Act, and then one lying about the lawsuit, which the Election Commission rejected, right? So he's a Democrat, and then his wife is the chair of the Democratic Party, and then all the people on the Elections Commission were Democrats, and they approve any Republicans, but they won't approve any Democrats. And they had to go against the 2018 hearing in the Circuit Court of Appeals on Hooker versus Moore, and there's a bunch of legal stuff, but multiple levels of corruption here. So Dalton Township is corrupt, and then Muskegon County is corrupt, and actually got a slight hint of the corruption at the state level in the middle of this whole thing as well. And it's just escalated to the point where I'm now running for office because someone has to replace the corrupt officials and turn the whole thing around. And if citizens don't do that, then you can't have a good society. And I know that very well from studying history and studying other societies now, right? Dalton Township should not have elections like China, where you get to vote for one person. Dalton Township should not have the business policies that the government has in Russia, where you need governmental friends to run a business. It's ridiculous, and someone has to do something. So now I'm running for supervisor, and very interested. I'm trying to recruit other people to run for the other positions, and there's a bunch of stuff around that. I'm going to be writing a lot of stuff on that. So that's a weird twist in life. Never thought I would be doing. Don't like the fact that I'm doing it now, but but I am nevertheless. And then the writing has been going great. I've been writing a lot of stuff, and there's big stuff that I really want to write. Some unique stuff that I think I can generate, which could be major, super important stuff. I mean, who knows? It might not become important to society now or history in the future, but I think some of the projects that I'm going to work on and I am working on could be in several different ways. So in literature and in philosophy and several other things. So it's possible. I tried to launch a meditation coaching business, meditatewithjeff.com, and joined FounderCo, this business organization, to help facilitate that. And I didn't end up taking off. I'm not the greatest salesperson in the world. I don't like selling, and that is really what is needed for the business success. Is someone get out there, push it, sell it. But the meditation stuff, works very good for me for managing my pain. I need it for managing my pain. and because I've had a headache since December 2015, and I think I manage it pretty well and do a lot of stuff. And so I would like to pursue that though, and help some other people with their chronic pain issues and stuff like that through meditation coaching. But I've just failed at the business pursuit of it, and I'll probably keep pursuing that, but I don't know exactly how. It was super interesting to watch this guy I know though, Matt, start FounderCo, which is an organization for supporting businesses. And originally he had an underwater drone company, so like a drone, like submarine drones, down in Holland. Very, very interesting. But I learned a ton being involved in like kind of the growth of that small organization. It's changed a lot now. They have a completely different focus and everything, but met a ton of interesting people, super interesting stuff. Let's see, just a couple more things. So I did like magic tricks. I learned one magic trick, which Kristen's kids just love, Evie and Judah, where you take, like, you have something, not this, I'd have like a little ball, and you would make it disappear, and then you make it appear under a cup, and they just loved it. That was such a blast. I did that a couple of days in a row, and they thought it was amazing. They thought I was so cool, and that was a lot of fun. And that's the only magic trick I know how to do is that one magic trick, and I just learned it for that. I took a Penn and Teller class on masterclass.com, which is great, and that was a lot of fun. And I'm still just learning at a furious pace, like always. Like I just have stacks of books around my bed, so none of that has changed. I have notes here on the stuff I'm learning yesterday and today. I'm taking a class from Hillsdale College on Churchill and one on Genesis, which is super interesting. And I'm reading a Churchill speech from 1938 and at Bristol College, and I've been studying the Gettysburg Address, which we have like 5 different recorded versions with slight variations, which is super interesting. John Adams' Thoughts on Government, a summary, a view of the rights of British America by Thomas Jefferson, the rights of the colonies examined by Stephen Hopkins, Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms by some of the founding fathers, mostly Thomas Jefferson, What Good's a Constitution by Churchill, 1941, speech by Churchill in his address to Congress, and Consistency in Politics by Churchill, and then the old Buddhist story of Angulimala, about this huge murderer that ends up converting to Buddhism and becoming essentially like a saint in their tradition, which is very interesting, and generating some unique ideas about the history of Buddhism and meditation and all that stuff. So my normal learning curve is still the way it normally is. That's just the stuff I'm studying yesterday and today. So hopefully I do finish that off. And then last big thing, we took a trip with my Aunt Karen and my mother down to the Ark down in Kentucky, which, they have a full-size replica Ark, which was awesome. And then we also stopped in Nashville, Tennessee to check out their replica of the Parthenon, which is a full replica of the Parthenon, which was awesome. And we stopped at some awesome barbecue places, several awesome barbecue places along the way too. And that whole trip was just a blast. It was a lot of fun, and I was very surprised at how well I rode in the car, because those are long days of driving, and we just did it over a 3-day weekend. But that whole trip was a lot of fun. All 3 of us had a ton of fun on that, so that was great. And there's probably a ton of other stuff I could go over. Obviously, the last 10 months I've done a lot more stuff than that, but those are some super interesting things. So a lot of stuff cooking in the works, a lot of writing projects happening, public speaking class I'm doing next month, and a bunch of other stuff, trying to partially launch the meditation stuff. Now I've got all the political stuff that I'm doing. I'm running for office as township supervisor in Dalton, so that's pretty crazy. And I've gotten a lot of support, hundreds of views on my Fighting Local Government Corruption, Part 15, is where I say that I'm running for office in an article and lay out why I'm running as a Republican, what's wrong with Dalton Township and what we need to do to fix it, and I kind of lay all that stuff out, and I've got a lot of support around that, so really cool. Huge learning curve, and obviously going to be a huge learning curve in the future, but a lot of interesting stuff. How I like having an interesting life, and it's definitely shaped up to be that. And at some point in the future, I'll probably do a video just on like super interesting books. I've been reading the Viking Volsungs and the story of Ragnar Lodbrok, the original stories, which is super interesting. This couple, married couple, Peter and Iona Opie, and they were probably the most important researchers in history on kids' games and kids' stories and stuff like this. They have a book on fairy tales that's just outstanding. I've been reading a lot of Frederick Douglass lately, which, like, Frederick Douglass is just amazing. I'm just starting to get into really reading Churchill. I've been reading a lot of Ovid, or most people say his name is Ovid, but I like the pronunciation Ovid, kind of like Odin, but instead Latin pronunciation instead of Old Norse pronunciation. But nevertheless, I like calling him Ovid. Probably the greatest poet of all time, and I've been reading some Dante, and I've been reading a ton of the Eastern religion traditions, like Tao Te Ching, or as one of my Chinese students calls it, the Tao Te Ching, and the Upanishads and the Dhammapada and all this type of stuff. So it's just been extremely. I'm always reading a ton of interesting stuff. There's an interesting one. So Hannah Arendt, probably the most important political philosopher of the 20th century, I'd never really studied, and she has a lot of deep stuff on thinking and history, forgiveness, and how politics work. She invented the banality of evil based on seeing the Eichmann trials in Jerusalem, which I've been studying, which is very interesting. I wrote an article fairly recently on great books on political corruption, which I think is a very important article for me to write, to expose people to those sources of the best information, which are often very small books or essays or pamphlets on political corruption. And that's been something unique to dive into, a lot to learn there. So tons of interesting stuff. Anyways, I wanted to get this update eventually, right before we run into a year of lapse time between videos, and just maybe start this process. We'll see how often I do them. Who knows, right? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. But it's interesting, and it's been pointed out to me that it is very useful. And, I kind of know my end. This is kind of a weird thing. There's a Western movie that's fairly recent, just from a few years ago, Godless, I think was the one, where there's this charismatic outlaw, crazy psycho that talks about how, like, some sort of mystical vision, he saw his death, right? And I kind of have, right? I've gotten to the point where I was told I was going to die, and I thought I was going to die, and I've been pretty low several times on the expecting to live scale, and I kind of know my end, right? I know, like, my lungs are weak, like, eventually it won't function well. My heart is cranking way too hard. Eventually that thing will just give out, and then if my brainstem slides around and stays in the wrong spot, my memory and my mental function go down. And I know what the end is like, because I've been there. I've been at really low mental function, and I've been not able to walk across the room without, basically falling over and leaning against the wall and all that stuff, and actually falling over. So I know what my end looks like. So it makes you appreciate the preciousness of the well-lived part of life where you can do things. So I like making this record because at some point, right, especially if I go way downhill and then I'm able to recover a little bit at some point, you can look back through these, and it's kind of this record, and it's revealing, and it's kind of interesting. I've been watching Father Brown recently, based on books by G.K. Chesterton, who's great. I've been reading his essays, so good. And it's Catholic, and so there's a big emphasis on confession in there, which is very interesting. Pacem in Terris, which is a thing that was released by the Catholic Church under Pope John the 23rd in like the 1960s, is super interesting, by the way, which Richard Feynman, the physicist, really liked it, and I got it from reading a set of his speeches called The Meaning of It All, which is super astounding on the difference between science and ethics, science and religion, this type of thing, and what that division is, and if it can be crossed or if it can't, and super interesting. But this emphasis on confession is kind of interesting because they don't have a ton of exposure to that. But the Father Brown Show is great, excellent writing, because the books were written in the early 1900s before World War I. But the show, it updated that to set the story in 1950, right? But they're writing from now. So it's historical writing, but it's taking historical writing from a different time and then updating them to historical writing of a different time, which is, just very, very interesting. They're extremely complex, super interesting. Anyways, on that note, I will let you go. I wish you well. It kind of feels like I'm leaving a class, like I'm going to say, all right, see you on like Thursday. But I will see you, whenever I see you. You will see me whenever you see me. Something like that. Until next time, this is Jeff signing off. Live long and prosper. Peace.